The night after Faith's victory should have been the beginning of peace. From the glass balcony of the mansion, Lagos shimmered like a city made of light. The lagoon reflected the moon in long silver streaks. The breeze moved softly through the palms. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Faith stood in silence, without fear breathing down her neck. No Madame Victoria, no Doris, no hunger, no torn mat on a cold floor, no shame, only peace, only beauty, only Ethan. He stood beside her in quiet confidence, one hand resting lightly over hers, his eyes fixed on the water below. Faith should have felt complete. She should have felt safe. She should have felt like every prayer she had ever whispered in pain had finally reached heaven. But that night, something inside her would not rest. There was a heaviness in the air, a strange pull in her chest, the kind of feeling that comes when joy is too perfect, and somewhere deep inside, your spirit knows perfection never stays untouched for long. Faith glanced down toward the road beyond the gates. At first, she saw nothing. Then, beneath the shadow of a jacaranda tree across the street, she noticed a silver sports car parked in the dark. Its lights were off. Its engine was silent, and yet it felt present, intentional, watching. Inside the car sat a woman with short silver hair and dark glasses. On her lap rested a thick file. She opened it slowly and studied the old photograph attached to the front page. It was Ethan, years younger, standing in front of a damaged industrial warehouse. His white shirt was streaked with soot. His face looked distant. His eyes looked like they had seen something they could never forget. Across the cover of the file were the words, Ethan Sterling, 2014 warehouse fire. The woman's lips curled into a faint smile. Not a smile of joy, a smile of memory, a smile of unfinished business. Back on the balcony, Faith shivered. Ethan turned at once. Are you cold? Faith forced a small smile and shook her head. No, I just suddenly feel like someone is watching us. For one brief second, Ethan's expression shifted. Only for a second. Then the calm returned. He squeezed her hand gently. You're safe with me, he said. Faith nodded, but deep inside the feeling remained. And later that night, long after the mansion had gone quiet and the city had softened into midnight, Faith woke with a start. The bed beside her was empty. She rose carefully, wrapped herself in a robe, and walked across the room. Ethan stood by the window, staring into the dark. He had not heard her. He had not sensed her. And in the faint reflection of the glass, Faith saw something she had never truly seen on his face before. Not anger, not sadness, not stress, fear. That was the first moment she knew. Whatever Ethan had saved her from, something from his own past, was still following him. The next morning, Faith tried to brush it away. She told herself she was overthinking. She told herself no one leaves behind years of suffering without carrying some fear into peace. But the strange feeling stayed with her all through the drive to her studio in Victoria Island. Normally, the studio was alive by the time she arrived. Music in the background, voices overlapping, scissors cutting fabric, tailors discussing measurements, machines humming like little engines of hope. It was the one place in Lagos that felt entirely hers. The place where pain had turned into purpose. The place where scraps had become elegance. The place where the girl who once sketched gowns in secret had become a woman whose name was now whispered at fashion events and written across magazine pages. But that morning, the studio was too quiet. As soon as Faith stepped in, her assistant Zara rushed toward her with a tablet in her hand and tension all over her face. Madam Faith, Zara said carefully, there is something online you need to see. Faith frowned and took the tablet. One look at the headline, and her blood ran cold. Old questions return as Ethan Sterling's name resurfaces in 2014 fire case. Faith froze. She read, and the deeper she read, the worse it became. The article did not openly accuse Ethan of wrongdoing, but it hinted in a way designed to poison every thought that followed. It spoke of a warehouse fire from 2014 connected to a former Sterling Global Logistics arm. It mentioned missing records, unclear insurance trails, disputed internal reports, an employee who had reportedly raised concerns before the incident. It said lives had been changed that night. It said questions had quietly disappeared. And it asked the one question gossip writers love most. What really happened? And who benefited from silence? Then Faith saw the photo. A younger Ethan stood outside the damaged building under emergency lights. His face was unreadable, his body stiff, his eyes darker than she had ever seen them. She did not look at the rest of the article immediately. She just stared at the image, because that man in the photograph looked like a stranger. Before she could think clearly, her phone rang. Ethan. Faith answered at once. Ethan. His voice came through low and controlled. Faith, if you've seen anything online today, don't believe the way it's being framed. Faith looked again at the tablet in her hand. So it's true, she asked. There was a pause. Then Ethan said quietly, a fire happened. Yes. Faith lowered herself slowly onto a stool. You never told me. I was going to. When? Another pause. That pause said everything. Faith ended the call, not out of anger, but because she suddenly did not know what to say. All day long she tried to work, but the studio no longer felt like refuge. The mannequins looked like witnesses. The mirrors reflected too many questions. The silence between stitches felt louder than noise. By the time she got home that evening, the article was no longer just gossip. It was a shadow sitting in the middle of her marriage. The mansion looked the same. Beautiful, controlled, expensive. But doubt changes the temperature of a house. Faith entered the sitting room and placed a printed copy of the article on the table. Then she waited. When Ethan came in, he understood immediately. He took off his jacket, loosened his tie, and stopped a few steps away from her. Neither of them Saturday. For several long seconds, no one spoke. Then Faith asked the question directly. What happened in 2014? Ethan looked at her, then looked away. There was a fire in one of our logistics warehouses. Faith's voice sharpened, and it became a serious internal matter. No, the word cut through the room. Do not speak to me like I am one of your board members. Do not speak to me like this is a press response. Talk to me like I am your wife. That hit him. Faith stepped closer. I trusted you before I knew your real name, Ethan. I trusted you when you wore worn-out boots and carried crates like any other man. I trusted your kindness before I ever saw your money. If there is darkness in your past, I deserve more than half answers. Ethan walked toward the window and stood with his back to her. There were irregularities inside the company then, he said at last. Records that didn't align. Missing figures. Inventory problems. Transfers that made no sense. I suspected the logistics division was being used for things outside its stated purpose. Faith stayed silent, and the fire happened before I could uncover enough. Were people hurt? Faith asked quietly. Ethan did not answer right away. Then he said, yes. The word landed heavily between them. Faith pressed her lips together. Why didn't you tell me? He turned back toward her, and the pain in his face was unmistakable. Because I did not want this reaching you. I did not want this touching your peace. Faith blinked back tears. That was not your choice to make. He knew she was right. And in that moment, something shifted. Not love. Love was still there. But certainty had cracked. Faith suddenly realized there were rooms inside Ethan's heart she had never entered. Locked rooms. Rooms filled with smoke and memory. Rooms he had never opened. Not because he did not care, but because he feared what would happen if he did. 2 nights later, Faith found an envelope on a designed desk at home. No stamp. No return address. only her name on the front in careful handwriting. Inside was a single card. If you want the truth about Ethan, come alone tomorrow at 4 p.m. Ask for room 7. Below it was an address in Soyole. Faith stayed at the card for a long time. Then she folded it and hid it before Ethan walked in. That night, she barely slept. Every time she shut her eyes, she saw the old photograph again. Ethan outside the warehouse, ash on his shirt, distance in his eyes, and fear in his reflection at the bedroom window. By morning, she had already made her decision. She would go. Alone. At 4 in the afternoon, Faith stepped out of a quiet car in front of a small private convalescent home tucked behind an old church building in Soyole. The building looked easy to miss, a place the city had passed 1,000 times without noticing. Inside, a nurse led her down a narrow corridor and stopped at a door marked room 7. Faith entered. A woman sat by the window in a cream shawl. One side of her face bore the softened marks of old burns. Time had healed what it could, but not erased the evidence completely. She turned slowly as Faith approached. "You came," the woman said. Faith nodded. "Who are you?" "My name is Amaro Koye." Faith remained standing. "What do you want from me?" Amara held her gaze. "Not from you. From truth." There was something about the way she said it that made Faith listen instead of leaving. Amara folded her hands in her lap. "In 2014, I worked in the accounts unit attached to the warehouse division. I began seeing figures that did not make sense. Entries repeated. Values inflated. Records that did not match movement. I asked questions." Faith's heartbeat quickened. And Amara's eyes shifted toward the window briefly, then returned. "And after that, the atmosphere changed. People grew quiet around me. Files disappeared. I was warned not to concern myself with matters above my level. Then one night, the fire happened." Faith swallowed hard. "Was Ethan there?" "Yes." "Doing what?" "I saw him outside the building." Faith stared at her. "Did you see what he did?" Amara answered carefully. "No. I saw him there. I saw panic. I saw smoke. I saw confusion. What I did not see, I will not invent." That mattered. Faith felt it immediately. Amara was not trying to dramatize her own pain. She was being exact, measured. Then Amara reached into a small metal box beside her and pulled out an old folded note with a payment authorization attached. She handed it to Faith. Faith looked down. The initials on the reference line were unmistakable. E. Sterling. Faith looked up sharply. "He help you?" Amara's expression did not change. "Someone from his office ensured my care continued quietly after the incident. Hospital costs. Living arrangements. Follow-up treatment. No publicity. No explanation. No public record." Faith looked back at the note again. Her mind raced. If Ethan was hiding guilt, why quietly help the survivor? If he had tried to help, why hide that from her? Nothing was getting clearer. It was only becoming stranger. That night, Faith went straight to Ethan's study. He looked up the moment she entered and knew at once this was not going to be a small conversation. She placed the note on the desk in front of him. "You knew she survived." Ethan looked down at it and went still. "Yes. And you never told me." "No." "Why?" He sat slowly, like memory had weight. "Because some truths do not go away," he said. "They wait. And every time I thought of telling you, I convinced myself it was better to leave the past buried." Faith shook her head. "You do not get to protect me with silence." He accepted that without argument. Then he crossed to a locked cabinet and took out an old leather folder. Inside was a photograph of two young men standing side by side. One was Ethan. The other looked enough like him to be unmistakably family, but easier somehow. Brighter. More open. Faith looked from the photo to Ethan. "Who is this?" "My brother." Faith frowned. "You never told me you had a brother." "Because he died in 2014. The room fell completely silent. Faith looked again at the photo. What was his name? Elijah. Was he there that night too? Ethan nodded once. He called me that evening. He said he had found something. Documents. Records. Evidence that people inside the company were using the warehouse division for things that should never have happened. He told me to meet him there. Faith barely breathed. And when you got there, the place was already in chaos. Smoke. Alarms. People shouting. Elijah was still inside. Faith covered her mouth. I tried to get to him, Ethan said quietly. I was too late. The grief in his voice was not fresh, but it was not old either. It was the kind of grief that never completely leaves. That was the moment Faith understood something she had missed before. Ethan's silence was not only about scandal. It was about loss. Deep, private loss. Still, questions remained. And before any answer could fully settle, the past stepped into public view again. At the launch event for Faith's educational initiative in Abuja, the atmosphere had been carefully managed. Elegant guests, dignitaries, press, polished speeches, cameras, applause. Faith stood in a stunning gown, composed and gracious. Ethan stood beside her, calm as ever. Then Faith saw the woman. Short silver hair, dark glasses. The same woman from the silver sports car. Ethan saw her too. And this time his reaction was unmistakable. He knew exactly who she was. She walked through the room with measured confidence, stopped near the front, and removed her glasses. Still hiding behind polished walls, Ethan, she asked. The room went quiet. Faith turned to him. Who is she? The woman answered before Ethan could. My name is Sarah. Then she paused, and said the words that changed everything again. I was married to Elijah Staling. Faith felt the air leave her lungs. Ethan did not move. Sarah's gaze shifted between them. That makes me the widow of the brother your husband never speaks about. Phones were already being lifted. Cameras were adjusting. Every guest suddenly became an audience member to a story they knew nothing about. Faith stepped forward. You're Elijah's wife. I was, Sarah said, before one terrible night took more than one future. Ethan's voice lowered. This is not the place. Sarah almost smiled. That sentence has protected powerful families for years. Then she turned to Faith and placed a flash drive on the table between them. If you truly want to know what happened, she said, ask Ethan what Elijah was trying to expose. Ask him who gained peace when the questions stopped. And with that, she walked away. She did not shout. She did not cause a scene. She did not need to. The truth had entered the room quietly, and landed harder than noise ever could. That night, Ethan and Faith sat alone in the media room, and opened the flash drive. There were spreadsheets first. Ledger entries. Transfer histories. Insurance summaries. Storage discrepancies. Enough to suggest disorder. Enough to suggest design. Then they found an audio file labeled EM, private. Ethan pressed play. A man's voice filled the room. Warm. Tired. Intelligent. Elijah. If this recording is being heard, Elijah said, then something has gone very wrong. Faith watched Ethan's face tighten. Elijah continued. There's manipulation happening through the warehouse chain. Not random error. Not simple carelessness. Deliberate movement of value through inflated claims, redirected records, and protected approvals. I wanted to believe the problem was small. It isn't. Faith felt her pulse pounding. I do not know who can be trusted anymore, Elijah said. If Ethan hears this, he must understand one thing. Do not assume the family is outside the problem. The audio crackled. Then came Elijah's final line. If I am right, the fire will not be the beginning of the story. It will be the cover for it. The file ended. Silence filled the room. Faith slowly turned toward Ethan. Do you think your father knew? She asked. Ethan stared at the black screen for a long time, and in the silence before he answered, Faith understood this was not the first time he had asked himself that question. At last, he said, I think he knew enough. Those words changed everything. Because until then, the fire had been a tragedy, a scandal, a mystery. Now it was becoming something else. Inheritance. Not of money, not of title, of damage, of secrets, of silence passed from one generation to the next. The days that followed were full of pressure. Calls from board members, questions from investors, cautious messages from sponsors, media requests, quiet warnings from men who spoke politely but meant something harder. Faith's own brand became tangled in headlines she had never wanted. And still, Ethan became more determined. One evening, Faith found him sitting alone in the library under a single lamp with a photograph of his father in his hand. Chief Nathan Sterling, respected patriarch, empire builder, publicly admired, privately impossible to read. You think he knew? Faith said softly. Ethan looked at the photograph. I think he knew enough, he repeated. Enough to stop it. Perhaps. Enough to bury it. Yes. Faith exhaled slowly. Then Sarah sent one final message. If you want the rest, come to the old house. The old Sterling family house stood outside in Yugu on ancestral land, elegant from a distance and unsettling up close. Closed shutters, a dry fountain, portraits waiting inside like silent judges. Faith went with Ethan. This time, nothing was hidden from her. Inside the old house, Sarah waited in the study. Elijah stopped trusting official systems before he died, she said. He copied records, notes, trails. He built a private archive under this house. She led them through the old library, behind a concealed panel, and down into a lower chamber. There they found it. Boxes, ledgers, storage drives, handwritten notes. A hidden archive of everything Elijah had been trying to gather before the fire. What they found did not point neatly to one dramatic villain. It pointed to something more disturbing. A system. Laid contracts. False valuations. Protected approvals. Insurance patterns that made no honest sense. And all of it seemed to trace back not to Ethan's time, but further up, further back, toward Nathan Sterling's era. Faith turned page after page, feeling colder with each one. Then she found Elijah's handwritten note, underlined twice. If I am right, the fire was not meant to start the scandal. It was meant to hide one. Faith looked up. Ethan had gone pale. Sarah stood still, watching. The fire was not the secret. The fire was the curtain. Back in Lagos, Ethan made the hardest decision of his life. He ordered an independent forensic review into every related structure tied to the warehouse division, the insurance chain, and the legacy approvals that stretched back to the years surrounding 2014. The board resisted, some politely, some firmly. One senior advisor told him, "You do not wash family history in public." Ethan looked at him and answered calmly, "Then family history should have been cleaner." Faith watched him and realized something had changed in him for good. This was no longer the man hiding pain behind silence. This was a man choosing truth, even if truth cost him everything. And consequences came quickly. Markets reacted. Partners hesitated. The press intensified. Faith's name was dragged into a conversation she never created. Then, just when it seemed the story could not become more complicated, one final twist arrived. Another envelope. Inside it was a photograph of Amora Okoye, alive, seated in what looked like a private residence. Not physically harmed, but clearly uneasy. On the back of the photo was a handwritten message. Some truths are old. Some are still being arranged. Ask Sarah why she waited so long. Faith stared at the words for a very long time. If Sarah wanted only justice, why now? Why reveal the truth in pieces? Why begin with public scandal before private clarity? Why reopen the past only when Ethan and Faith had reached the brightest point of their lives? Faith looked down the long hallway toward Ethan's study, where he was buried in legal calls, audit documents, and decisions that could destroy the empire he inherited. Then she looked again at the message in her hand. The question was no longer just what happened in 2014. Now the question was darker. Who was telling the truth? And who was using the truth for something else? Outside, rain began to fall over Lagos. Inside the mansion, Faith stood motionless with a photograph in her hand and understood that peace had not returned. It had only paused. Because some shadows do not disappear when light touches them. They move. They wait. And sometimes, they grow. Ethan thought truth would finally free him. Faith thought love would finally steady them. But the deeper they looked into the fire, the more they realized the flames had never truly gone out. They had only been hidden behind power, behind wealth, behind reputation, behind family. And now the crown they wore so proudly had begun to cast a shadow of its own. So now tell me, what do you think really happened behind the 2014 warehouse fire? Is Ethan a man trying to correct an old wrong? Or did he hide too much for too long? And can Sarah truly be trusted? Or is she using the truth for her own reasons? Drop your theories in the comments below. If this story kept you hooked, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you do not miss the next part. Share this story with someone who loves powerful stories filled with mystery, love, and suspense. Stay blessed, and I will see you in the next story. In case you missed the part 11 of this story, follow the link in the description or comment section for the it.